Hello and welcome to the One Life Church devotional series where we cover the entire Bible in 20 months. Well, I'm standing right now in the lobby of our apartment block. Now you can see the post boxes down here and there's the floor. This is a wind protection. It's terrible weather outside. But last night I came out here to my car and lying on the floor was a homeless man, clearly deranged, under a blanket. I nearly tripped over him as I came through here. And we could hear during the night him moving around, quite unnerving, but it reminded me of our text today, 1 Samuel chapter 21, the story of David when he was beginning his flight from Saul. So what had happened was David had fled to a place called Nob, where he had gone into the house of God and asked the priest there, "Can you give me some bread?" The guy said, "I got nothing other than the bread of the presence." So he says, "Well, give it to me." The priest was very, very nervous, not knowing why David was alone. David lies to him, asks him then for a weapon. He gives him the sword of Goliath, and then David flees. He flees to a place called Gath, where the king there, his name was Achish. Now, David was alone. Remember, he's left his wife behind, his family behind, his brothers behind. He's been anointed king, and yet the present king wants to take him out. You must be asking the question, if you're David, where is God? What has happened? Why am I being hounded like a dog? And so what he does, he all alone, terrified in this place called Gath, he starts to pretend like he's a madman. His eyes rolling, saliva down his beard, clawing the door, and then the king of Gath and the leaders there just leave him alone because they think how useless is a madman, just like the guy who was at my door the other night. So I asked the question then, what's all this about? What is the principle behind this? Well, our second chapter today, 1 Corinthians 1, yes, we're starting a new book today, I think sheds light on the principle that's at play here. Paul greets this church, says, "I'm an apostle of God." He says, "You are a great church. You have the testimony of Jesus and that you've got the gifts of the Spirit operating." But he says, but there's one thing, you need to stop divisions among you. Some say, Paul baptized me. Others say Peter did. Others say, Apollos did. Others say I'm of Jesus. He says, look, is God divided? Now, clearly not. Now, cut it out is what he's saying. He says, in fact, we shouldn't be fighting about baptism. We're here to preach the gospel. And he says this, "I preach not with wisdom or eloquence, lest the cross of Christ be emptied of his power." He's saying, if I come with fancy words and all sort of carefully crafted arguments, then, you're going to be intrigued with me. No. I come raw with the power of God. He says, "For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing." It doesn't sound very clever, but to those who are being saved, it is the power of God. There is power in the gospel message. For God was pleased through the foolishness of what is being preached to save those who believe. One aspect of the power of the gospel is its saving power. And so he says now, Jews are asking for signs, miracles. Greeks are asking to titillate my thinking with clever words and clever arguments. He says, but to those who God has called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ is the power of God and he's the wisdom of God. You want to know wisdom? Look at Jesus. You want to know power? Go to Jesus. And then he says, for the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God. So even when God just touches someone nominally, it's stronger than human strength. But this is the principle. How does that power flow? From where does that wisdom come? It doesn't come from professors, not that there's anything wrong with professors if they're humble. It doesn't come from very well-presented, manicured speakers, not that there's anything wrong with that if they're humble. He says this, but God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. And what God often does to men like David, remember, this is the guy who killed Goliath. This is the one who's been anointed king. He allows him to run. He allows him to go through hardship so that his strength is not what he relies on. Is that it's emptied out. He's an empty vessel, and he's ready to be a vessel of the power of God and the wisdom of God. That's God's way. Look, this is what verse 29 says. So that no one may boast before him. The last verse says that the one who boasts in the Lord. If you want to be used by God, you want to humble yourself before him. If you don't, his way is that he shows you that actually your strength is weakness and your wisdom is folly. And he allows you to come to the end of yourself. He's not a masochist trying to hurt you. He's wanting to get you to this point of believing that God uses the weak, those who are dependent on him.